This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse, murder, and their families. I'm your host, Laine, and this is episode 183, Fallon Fridley Updates with Kristin Fridley. In episode 102, I told you the story of 2-year-old Fallon Fridley, a precious little girl in Georgia whose babysitter, a close family friend, tortured and killed her in December 2020. The attack was caught on the babysitter's in-home video surveillance system, and police found incriminating search terms on Kirstie Flood's phone, such as, "What does it mean to have a sudden urge to beat a child that's not yours?" Today, I have several updates for you in Fallon's case, including plea deals, sentencing, and more. You'll also hear my recent conversation with Fallon's mom, Kristin Fridley, who has been to hell and back over the past 4 years, but manages to remain grateful for the blessings in her life. For anyone not familiar with Fallon's case, I'll give you a brief overview. On December 9, 2020, the Sandy Springs police responded to a 911 call about an unresponsive child from the Edgewater apartment complex in Sandy Springs, Georgia. 2-year-old Fallon Lynn Fridley was pronounced dead early the next morning at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. At the time she became unresponsive, Fallon was in the care of a babysitter, 29-year-old Kirstie Flood. Initially, Kirstie claimed Fallon fell off a playground slide earlier that day. However, medical examiners discovered that Fallon had sustained severe injuries inconsistent with an accident, including a massive skull fracture and damage to internal organs. The autopsy also revealed evidence of sexual assault, and her death was ruled a homicide. Kirstie, a stay-at-home mother of 2, had been friends with Fallon's mother for several years. She regularly babysat Fallon, who was best friends with her own 3-year-old daughter, who I'll call H. Kirstie and her boyfriend, Jeffrey Myers, lived in the apartment together with H and the couple's shared newborn son. During the investigation, police found highly incriminating search terms on Kirstie's phone, including, "What type of people enjoy abusing other people's children?" and "What does it mean to have a sudden urge to beat a child that's not yours?" Authorities arrested Kirstie on December 11, 2020, and charged her with multiple counts, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated battery, and first-degree cruelty to children. But the investigation didn't end there. Jeffrey Myers, Kirstie's boyfriend, was also implicated. Although Jeff claimed he wasn't present when Fallon was injured, police concluded that he was in the apartment when the abuse occurred and charged him with second-degree murder and second-degree cruelty to children. Investigators said that while Jeff may not have inflicted the injuries, he failed to protect Fallon or intervene to prevent the abuse, much of which, shockingly, was captured on the family's in-home video surveillance system. Soon enough, authorities found that Kirstie's mother, Karen Flood, had influenced the investigation. After Kirstie's arrest, Karen gained custody of her granddaughter, H. Evidence emerged showing that Karen had coached H, instructing her to remain silent about any wrongdoing she had seen Kirstie do. Police arrested Karen in June 2021, charging her with influencing a witness. Prosecutors alleged that Karen attempted to manipulate her granddaughter's testimony to protect her daughter. Karen was later released on bond. Meanwhile, the courts removed H from Karen's custody, placing her in her biological father's care after he successfully petitioned for legitimacy. Karen Flood and Jeff's mother, Gina Myers, are still battling in Fulton County Family Court regarding custody of Kirstie and Jeff's young son. They're scheduled for a 2-week trial in November of this year. Besides that, there have been a number of updates in Fallon's case since I first told you her story in March 2022. I'll go through those first, and afterward, you'll hear my recent conversation with Kristin. Fallon's case seemed destined to go to trial, which would have made public all of the gruesome, horrific details of Fallon's case. Fortunately, before her family had to endure that awful, traumatic experience, the Sandy Springs police posted a press release on Facebook, notifying the public that on March 18, 2024, both Kirstie Flood and Jeffrey Myers pleaded guilty in Fallon's death. Jeff pleaded guilty to his single charge of second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years in the Georgia prison system. Kirstie Flood pleaded guilty to the following charges: malice murder, felony murder, aggravated sexual battery, which was added after her initial charges, first-degree cruelty to children, making false statements to law enforcement, and tampering with evidence. For her role in Fallon's death, Kirstie received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. The same day, Kristin Fridley posted on the Justice for Fallon Facebook page, 1,194 days after Fallon was murdered, we got justice. I feel that through this tragedy, God chose me to be a light to others, and I intend to do so. We finally have justice for Fallon. Kristin told the court about Fallon's death, my life was completely upended. Everything I had was stolen from me. Words cannot express the depths of my grief. The days, weeks, and months afterwards were all a nightmare. My beautiful, sweet 2-year-old daughter was murdered by someone I considered to be one of my best friends. 32-year-old Kirstie Hannah Flood is currently serving her life sentence in the Pulaski State Prison in Hawkinsville, which houses only adult female felons. Jeffrey Scott Myers is currently in the Jenkins Correctional Facility in Millen, Georgia. As for 60-year-old Karen Denise Flood, in early October 2024, prosecutors elected not to pursue Karen's prosecution on her charge of influencing a witness. They did so on the grounds that the inherent emotional expense of subjecting the child victim, HF, to a trial outweighs its interest in prosecuting defendant Karen Flood. Kristin Fridley and her husband, Cameron Gant, separated a couple of years ago. She has since become engaged to a man named Beau. Kristin and Beau found out they were pregnant earlier this year, and the baby's due date was December 9th, the same day Fallon was fatally injured. However, the baby, a little girl, was instead born almost 4 months early on August 23rd, weighing only 1 pound 7 ounces. She spent 4 days in the NICU, but it breaks my heart to tell you that Kristin's second daughter, Rhea Jean, died on August 27, 2024. You'll hear more about Rhea from Kristin later in the episode. One more update in Fallon's case involves a Law and Crime Network YouTube video titled Monster Babysitter and Boyfriend Savagely Beat 2-Year-Old Girl to Death, which was released on August 10, 2024. This 2.5-hour video was narrated by Mr. Black, the host of Law and Crime's The Disturbing Truth podcast, who handled the subject matter with as much respect, empathy, and critical thinking as I always hoped to hear. What was remarkable about this video was that it contained footage of the vast majority of both Kirstie Flood and Jeffrey Myers' police interrogations, all of which was previously unreleased. When I first watched that footage, it flat out infuriated me to hear Kirstie's blatant lies and self-aggrandizing behavior. Kirstie made herself out to be a saint while trying to blame Fallon's injuries on any number of people or events. Let's see. Among her list of probably guilty parties were the playground slide, Fallon's stepdad, Cameron, the sidewalk, the vinyl-covered cement ground at the park, a loose board under her sink, the cement under her carpet, and her pit bull, Grace. I probably missed a few, too. It was at least a little amusing that Kirstie clearly thought herself the smartest person in the room right up till the moment the detectives slapped the handcuffs on her. Giving the video a second watch, hearing all of that was still irritating, but it was also thought-provoking. When Kirstie was told that Fallon had died, her answer was, "Wow." She was on the phone with her mother, Karen, at the time, and said emotionlessly into the phone, "Did you hear that?" That was after working so hard to make the detectives believe she loved Fallon like one of her own children and cared for her better than Fallon's own mother did. When Jeffrey received the news in the interview room next door, he at least had a human response, looking stunned and beginning to sob. The Law and Crime Network video was very well done, and if you're at all interested in Fallon's story, I recommend giving it a watch. If you don't already hate Kirstie Flood, You will by the end of that video. I'll include the link in today's show notes. Actually, watching that video for the second time was on my to-do list for over a week, and I just finally got around to it the night before Kristin and I talked. You know, some days when I wake up with an intimidating to-do list, I just can't get myself into the work zone. I've always got an episode to research, write, record, edit, and release, plus the freelance writing I do on top of that, so if my focus isn't locked in, I'm doomed to a day of distraction. That's a huge reason I start my mornings with Magic Mind. Hear me out. Before Magic Mind, I'd just keep chugging coffee, hoping to kickstart my energy and focus. It'd work for a bit, but then I'd crash hard, like staring at my screen for an hour doing nothing hard. But ever since I added Magic Mind to my routine, it's been a lifesaver. I still drink my coffee, because no one will ever pry my morning cup out of my hands, but now I have this little green shot alongside it, and it keeps me steady and focused throughout the day. No more jitters, no more crashes, just consistent energy, focus, and clarity. Magic Mind has matcha, which has less caffeine than coffee, but works with the L-theanine in the shot to keep your mind calm and sharp. And the nootropics and adaptogens help with memory, focus, and stress. I've noticed that when I use Magic Mind for several days in a row, it gets so much easier to handle everything on my plate without feeling overwhelmed and wanting to dig a hole and crawl into it. If you're like me and need a way to feel productive and energized without burning out, seriously, give Magic Mind a try. Right now, you can get up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase with my code BYLAINE20. Head to magicmind.com/BYLAINE20 and use the code BYLAINE20. That's magicmind.com/BYLAINE20 and use the code BYLAINE20. Let me know if you try it. I think you'll feel the difference just like I did. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I recently talked again with Fallon's mom, Kristin, who had a lot to say about Kirstie and Jeff, the case, what it's like to lose 2 daughters within 4 years, and more. Her resolve and groundedness will never not amaze me. After a quick sponsor break, you'll hear our conversation. I'm glad you were able to come on tonight for an update because it's been a while. It was probably 2 years ago when the episode came out.
Yeah, me too. Asher had just been born, I believe. I know he was a newborn, so it's been at least 2 years.
At least there's been some movement and the case kind of has resolved for the most part. Has Karen been sentenced or is she pretty much off the hook?
She's basically off the hook. They ended up severing her case, which honestly, I think at the end of the day, they kind of felt bad for her in a weird way. I think she realized you're co-defendant. So if you go to trial, you're going to be sitting next to your daughter, and that's not going to be great. So I think she eventually took a plea deal. She had to undergo counseling and some other things. Not exactly sure all of her stipulations. By now, she's probably completed everything. And I don't know. That is something I didn't really ask all the information from because I was kind of like, ever since we got H back with her dad and all that kind of settled, for lack of a better word, I kind of forgot about Karen. I mean, inexcusable what she did, but when you look at Kirstie, she obviously came from somewhere. And I know she used to tell me when we were friends, she complained about her mom a lot. And I don't think her or her brother's whole life was very stable growing up. So I don't know for sure, but I'm just going to assume she has some mental health conditions. And I think deep down, she probably knew what her daughter did and maybe in her own way was trying to do the best she thought she could do for her daughter, but at the same time at a great service to her granddaughter. And I've told my mom straight up, if not that we would be in a situation like that because I'm not evil, but if there was ever a scenario where I did something terrible. I don't care about me at that point. You better protect Asher under any circumstances, even if it is from me. If I steered off in the wrong direction or I became reckless or self-destructive, I would hope that my family would protect Asher before they would protect me. So as a parent, I can see where you would want to protect your child, but I'm not a grandparent yet. I've got some time. He'll be 3 soon, but we've got some time.
Yeah, quite a bit. No rush there, buddy.
Exactly. I'm like, oh, calm down. But I would hope that I would still feel that same way. And my mom has agreed with me. There's just something about grandbabies where you get to have all the fun stuff and all the love and you
give
don't
them back.
Exactly. And then, but at the same time, it's like your child made this child. And so it's a completely different relationship. But sometimes I feel like not necessarily a more loving one, but at least what I'm seeing with my mom is there's just something very dear to her about her grandchildren. It is special, and not everyone gets to live to see their grandchildren. And I won't know for a while, hopefully at least 30 years before I'm having any grandbabies. Yeah, seriously. But, I can't put myself in the grandparent's shoes. So that's the thing with Karen. It's like, do I understand from a motherly perspective? Yes and no. I understand wanting to protect your daughter, but I also know that if my son did anything horrific like that, I mean, even now I can tell you, I would not take up for him. Do I know if I'd ever leave his side? No, I'd probably go see him in prison if he did something terrible, I guess, depending to the degree of what would be done. But I would not be trying to protect him from his own evil. I just can't see myself doing that. And again, that's kind of circled back to the mental health. And we all have some mental health issues here and there, right? Who doesn't?
Right.
I think just about the whole world, especially with the economy and everything and the election coming up, we've all probably got a little bit of generalized anxiety, right? And
no doubt.
Everyone to a degree, I think, experiences depression. But then when you get to the more complex things, like I don't have an official diagnosis for Kirstie Flood, but she definitely embodies all the signs of a narcissist. Definitely after hearing the interview and some other things that I'm actually free to discuss now, there's some more complex mental health things going on. So that could be that it was handed down from her mother partially, or just living under her roof. I do believe in nature and nurture, but I definitely think that nurture, in my opinion, plays a bigger factor into a lot of mental health things. And at least I've experienced that in my own life. My mother has always been the best mother in the world, but my father, not so much. And even though they divorced when I was 10 and we moved states when I was 11 or 12, the effects of his abuse lasted in my entire life. And they sent me down a really dark path for a while. And my mom, she did all the nurturing she could. But once you damage a child so young psychologically, it's really hard to undo. And my whole family, I would consider the people, I would consider myself today to be a good person. But, I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, nature versus nurture. I think they both have a lot of things to do with each other. But I just think nurturing, and just in my opinion, is kind of the stronger part of that, because you see people with actually really decent upbringings that turn out to be absolute monsters. But I feel like when you're talking about killers, and I take my true crime in doses, but I'm definitely still a listener. I've always kind of been a true crime fan, for lack of a better word, and also the direction I want to take Fallon's story. And I'm kind of veering on more content like your own. And there's a few other creators who I feel like do it really respectfully. And so I do a lot of listening, kind of like for research on how I want to approach these types of things, because I think it's getting better, but I've seen some of these topics be treated so disrespectfully, and I won't say her name, but I'm sure she has millions of subscribers. But she does her makeup and talks about her murder, and she giggles and makes little jokes. And I'm embarrassed now to say that I was a fan of hers because she made that content more digestible for me. But I think, yes, is it good to get the facts and to be able to wrap up these stories in a way that people can understand? It's important because these stories need to be told. But to giggle and make little jokes and stuff it's gross, you know?
Yeah. And you understand it from a different side at this point. You know, you have the unfortunate experience of knowing what it's like for someone to talk about your life as if they know something. That's just got to be so jarring.
Exactly. It is. And, you know, they pled guilty in their interrogation footage has come out. So I've seen just recently several really large YouTube channels cover it. And each time one of these things happens, my heart sinks.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how is this going to be portrayed? Exactly. Where's the facts? And I will say there's been several channels who did Fallon's story, Such Justice, and that I still speak to. There was one, not that it was disrespectful, but this one channel was saying that Fallon's birthday was December 9th or 10th. And that was the day, you know what I'm saying? So they were mixing up her birthday with her death date. And he had made a comment like, this birthday, her mom wasn't there. And it wasn't, my God, a jab towards me, but I'm like,
you can't help but take it that way.
Exactly. And I'm like, one, even if it was her birthday, I still got to go to work. But usually I took those days off. But, you know, maybe we were going to celebrate on the weekend. But I'm like, my page is very public. And if you're doing any research or you're just watching other videos, it's pretty easy to figure out her birthday and her death date. So he kept saying that the day she passed was her birthday, and that really bothered me. So I usually don't even watch them. I usually let my fiance watch them first, but I gave this one a shot and I got like 10 minutes in, and after he repeated the birthday wrong like 3 times, I just turned it off because there's a lot of videos out there, but a lot of them are just smaller creators and kind of feel like they throw a PowerPoint slide together. And no, it's just a lot of the information is correct. So I don't really find value in watching those things. I think it actually, there's more of a disservice to my mental health because it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And I'm like, certain things, I'm like, if you had just done a minuscule amount of research, you would have realized that wasn't true. So if you're mixing up birthdays and death dates, I just don't have patience for that. I know that sounds...
No.
Okay. Thank you. Cause I'm like, I don't want to come off sounding like snarky, but after going through this now for almost 4 years, I've had to put some boundaries up from myself and the internet. And
that's good.
Yeah, like sometimes I just delete the Facebook app off my phone completely. And I have a friend that helps me run the account who will respond to messages here and there, or if I ask her to post something, she will. And I've said it before, just recently I got a terrible comment. I was pregnant and I was in the hospital trying to stay pregnant. And that's when Law and Crime Network and Mr. Black came out with their video. And this is a massive channel. So my page at this time was getting rushed with new followers. So that's always a little stressful for me just because it's a lot of growth and it's good. Yeah. I love that people are coming to hear about Fallon, and I'm sharing my writing, and I've been told that my poems and how I describe grief has helped people, and I strive to keep continuing to do that. But that also comes with a lot of people who are misinformed. And so, case in point, I was sitting in the bathtub at the hospital and I opened up my phone and someone had found my personal page, and after watching that video and just said something along the lines of what a terrible mother I am, and that I should be locked up too, and like how dare I bring more life into the world. And I just I'm sitting here in a pretty stressful situation, trying
Yeah,
not
no
to go
doubt.
into labor at 24 weeks. And I'm getting
Ugh,
comments like this. And I look and I'm like, that's not his fault. I mean, he was very fair to me and to Cameron. He could spot her, pardon my language, but he could spot Kirstie with bullshit from a
mm-hmm.
mile away. And so I'm like, did this lady watch half a second of the video? So that's why I've had to put up some boundaries with myself and the internet. And I kind of have to decide what's important content for me and what's not. And usually these messages come to the Justice for Fallon page, but for this woman it's not hard to find my personal page, but she found my personal page and
Yeah,
went out of her way to say that. So,
I
and
don't understand these
so
people.
I don't either. And I've made, I don't know how many posts about, appreciation for all of the love I get because it surely outweighs the negative. But I stress to people all the time. I really wish that I could say that the love was louder than the negative, but there's something about that human psyche and
Mhm.
a message like that, in the first year after Fallon's death would have set me just spiraling because
Of
I've
course.
battled for so long with blaming myself and I've never truly fully forgiven myself. I think some days I have and others I haven't. And I think that's going to be a lifelong struggle for me. And logically, I know that it wasn't my fault,
Right. But
but
logic and what your brain tells you in the middle of the night are two different things.
exactly. Because there's days I go back and I'm like we talked about in our first episode, the scratches she had on her face. And then I'm like, yeah, but she told me the dog did it. So, so
Right. And
I
you want to
just,
believe your friend,
I
of
do that a
course.
lot. So I've had to learn over the years to just try to be more compassionate to myself. So
Yeah.
entertaining misinformation and trolls on the internet is just something I just don't really tolerate anymore. I mean, it's one thing to get one or two things wrong, but again, I just don't see the need to watch an entire video when our birthday is wrong and you're making it the same day when Fallon's case is concerned. I usually, if I don't have a family member pre-watch it, if there's any kind of misinformation within the first 5 minutes, I'm usually just going to click off. I'm not going to read the comments. I've heard all I need to hear. This is not going to add any value for me.
Right.
And I just keep going. Because there's been some
Yeah, you have
creators
to.
that make videos and their commentary or kind words towards me has just brought me to tears. And it's kind of healing, because it's people who are strangers who I feel like see me. They get
Yeah.
it. They don't think I'm a bad mom. They don't think that this is my fault. And I literally get brought to tears with happiness because sometimes I feel like I'm understood. And that has been kind of the journey I've gone on, navigating this because never in my life have I had to deal with thousands of people paying attention to me. So this is a whole new thing for me. And you have to get used to it. And I'm sure you as a podcaster, especially with growth of your channel, I have seen your channel's been seeing some growth in the last 4 years. And that's really exciting. But
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced that as well, where it's like each stage of growth is a little bit hard and you kind of have to navigate it. And you really have to prioritize what you're going to entertain and let in and what you're not. Because if you let everything in or soaked up everything that people said about you, what is the purpose of that for you?
Right. No, I would be under my bed and never coming out, I think, if I absorbed everything. It's hard to shoulder off the negative stuff.
Yeah, I think it's just a weird place where not everyone can understand. And I think
Yes.
I hate to call myself an influencer. I don't really consider myself that, but as someone with a page with a semi-large following, I think I'm up to 9,000. I think we're getting close to 10. So if anything, I think I'm considered a micro influencer. Again, I don't like to say I'm an influencer, but I think anybody that has any type of internet presence can relate to what I'm saying and just know what kind of things you listen to about your own self. You know, you have to be really careful with that, is at least what I've learned. Because in the beginning, I would Google it and I'd read every article and watch every video. And I had to ask myself the question, what is this doing for you? And the answer was nothing. And then I was like, is it hurtful or is it helpful? You know, if it's not helping me, why waste my time? And so that's why now when I just come across anything and we're getting things wrong in the first 5 minutes, I just don't really, and again, it's one thing to mix up a detail or two because it's a very intricate story. Right. A lot of misconceptions with like, was she just the in-home daycare service that I hired, or where people don't quite understand the relationship that me and Kirstie had, which is a frustrating misunderstanding because it adds a whole new layer of like nuance to the conversation. But when we're mixing up our birthday with our death date and we're making it the same day, I just click off and I don't need to watch that. And I just push it out of my mind because I can't stop what people are going to do or create. But that is why I choose to be so vocal and run my page, is because if you want to hear about my daughter's story, you can hear it straight out of the horse's mouth. Right. I feel like I'm been as open as I could be before trial. And there's some things, you know, the injuries and things that are out there, people know, but I'm not ever going to be one that's going to go into intricate details about the actual attack and things like that, just to preserve her dignity, for one. And two, I purposely did not want to know very specific details. And I know when we were doing trial prep and when the day was finally coming where it's about to be jury selection, I was asking hard questions, and the medical examiner's testimony, it was going to take an entire day. And I said, I had to make that decision. You know, it was hard because I had gotten pretty close with the assistant district attorney, Lauren McCauley, and she had a lot of her spiel on that day. So I had to decide, like, do I want to hear a lot of our side's argument and watch her and see what she says? And if I do, then I kind of have to decide if I want to hear every single injury. And we're not talking about the ones we know, the skull fracture. I'm talking every little laceration and every little bump. And I just ultimately decided that that was the day I was not going to attend. And then we know about the video, still haven't seen it. Don't ever plan on seeing it. I know the news, they played a tiny clip of it, which I did see by accident. And I think that is the only little part they released. And I will say because I did a little interview for the news, because truly one thing about Fallon's case is it really has changed the way they are prosecuting and investigating child abuse from day one, because they kind of went back and they realized the mistakes they had made, and not horrible, but things they could grow from. Like, you know, for instance, Kirstie Flood should have been arrested that night.
For sure.
Yeah, it wasn't long, but it took them until the next evening. And also Jeffrey Myers should have been arrested long before he was out about 30 days. Actively overdosing on drugs, in my opinion, trying to commit suicide, which then he would have escaped ever having to face the music. And also she was able to hide critical evidence because of that, the SD card and her nanny camera. When they were released from the police station, it was early in the morning of December 10th. and they went back to the apartment, and both of them together took the SD card out of the camera, which again, I don't know how this happened because they did have a search warrant on her house that night as she was being interviewed. So how this nanny cam didn't just get confiscated, I'm not sure. I don't know if there was a miscommunication between the detectives and who was on site, because she was speaking to the detectives about this camera. And so I just kind of wonder where the mix-up was there, because you would think one of the detectives would have walked out of the room and called the people that were searching the apartment and saying, hey, look for this camera, compensate it. And I'm not criticizing the Sandy Springs police, because ultimately they did a really good job. They got Kirstie Flood behind bars for the rest of her life. Jeff, for better or worse, did get his 15, and they were all really dedicated to Fallon's case. And I know Fallon's case really touched them all in a very big way. And even people who had left the department before the case was ever going to trial or anything were constantly wanting updates. And the lead detective in particular, I had my frustrations with him in the beginning because he didn't talk to me much. And I really kind of didn't like him very much. And I would express that to Lauren. And she said, he's a really good guy. He's got 4 young kids. In this case, has been really hard for him. And not only that, I think it was one of his, if not the first murder case that he was lead on. So he's a relatively, seasoned detective, but we're moving up, right? We're lead investigators now. So this is one of his first cases as the lead investigator. He has 4 kids. And I know this case really, from what she said, it really tore him up. Like he was having a hard time coping with it. So bygones be bygones. We hugged each other in court, and looking at it now, I'm like, I can't imagine what a difficult job that must be for any human, especially if you have 4 small children of your own, and seeing what a beautiful, gorgeous angel my daughter was. And detectives see all the nitty gritty, right? So, I mean, he saw her in the hospital before I did. He saw all of the autopsy photos. He saw a lot more of it than I did. And even being a total stranger, I can imagine things like that would keep you up at night.
Now, for a word from my sponsors.
So again, I don't want to criticize the Sandy Springs Police Department or the Fulton County Prosecutor's Office or anything, I think, but they have really made some good changes since this case happened. And I mean, prosecutors, sometimes they're responding to calls in the middle of the night to go out and see crime scenes. And they did realize that it was absolutely a mistake that Kirstie Flood was not arrested that night, and that Jeff should have been arrested that night. So we're seeing that they're willing to see where they could have done things better. And, they're upfront about that. And if they're growing from that, and if another child or another family, God forbid, but unfortunately, as we know, these things happen. So if they can do things just a little bit differently to ease any family's pain just a little bit, or get the process moving quicker, that already is something astounding that Fallon has done for other children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's got a legacy in many different ways, and that's a very important part of it.
Yeah, she definitely does. And I'm just still here trying to live through her. And I don't consider myself overly religious, but I do believe in God, because I believe in heaven, and I have to believe in God because I believe my daughter's in heaven. And I struggled a lot with anger. And I will tell you, just recently, within the last 2-3 weeks, I've finally forgiven him. And it's been such a relief, because of course I'm angry with Kirstie and Jeff, but I think the most toxic anger with my anger with God or the universe or whatever people believe, because that's just feeling like whatever the powers that be are out there are not protecting you, or your prayers aren't being heard. And forgiving him was huge, because I do feel strongly led to do so many things in Fallon's name. And I know I'm not there yet in my healing journey, but I can see myself in 5, 10, 15 years. My goal is to have a foundation. I'm studying to be a paralegal. I have a name for it. It's Fallon's Angels. And my goal is to help single mothers specifically, or women that are in abusive relationships, get out, because we see all too often these family annihilator situations. And when I was going through my divorce, I was kind of caught in the middle, right? Like I make too much for any type of assistance, but I don't make enough to hire a lawyer and be able to pay my light bill. So I had a group of friends who all put in some money for me. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And they said, we knew you would say that. Take this money, stop rocking, and go hire that lawyer. And I was just sobbing. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Because divorces can get pretty messy. And what is the statistic? They say it takes an average of 7 times for a woman to leave. And so that's kind of where I see me going into and trying to definitely help children that are in foster care homes. And I don't know exactly what the future is going to look like yet, but I think there will be public speaking and some type of foundation, or I'm definitely planning on writing a book. So I see myself going in these directions. So sometimes when I am really angry with God and I'm like, why am I still here? And my daughter isn't, I just feel like spiritually led in these kind of directions. And I'm like, okay, especially in my past, I was a very reckless teenager and young adult, and probably had more scrapes with death than I even realized. And for so many years, I could not believe that God I don't want to say let, but it happened. And I just could not wrap my head around why my daughter would be taken instead of me. So
Yeah.
I just feel like there's got to be some type of purpose. Like I'm supposed to do something on this earth. And again, right now, I know I'm not there. So I just hope that if I keep searching for those answers and praying, that those answers will come to me. And they're not going to come all at the same time, but I just hope within the next 5, 10 years, like I said, that I will have a clear direction and just can do some good work in the world, and all in the name of Fallon. You know, that's my goal, is just for so many people to know her story and know it because they were helped by it for whatever reason. If a child escapes an abusive home because of Fallon, if a mother is able to get her children away from a horrifically abusive father or home situation because of Fallon, then her legacy will never die. And that's what I feel like just super led to do in my heart. And I'll figure it out. It's hard. I'm like at A and I got to figure out how to get this D.
And you want to jump the rest of the alphabet.
Exactly. And we are just now in a place where they pled guilty, and I can really talk about, more detail than I thought. That the second that happened, I was going to be running my mouth, but I found myself kind of saying a little more here and there, but there's so much more. And that's why I was actually excited when you asked to do an update. Like, yes, actually, really any questions you have about the case, if I have any knowledge of it, I can tell you. It's kind of freeing.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm like, I can finally talk about some of these things. So,
wow. Yeah, I mean, that has to be a huge weight off your shoulders too, because having to stay quiet about certain things that the news can't report or whatever is kind of under the prosecutor's hats for the time being. I can't imagine how frustrating that is. But if you talk about it at that time, then the case could be jeopardized, and no one wants that. Are there any things in particular that you had to keep quiet that you wanted to talk about but couldn't?
Yeah, there was a few things that I kind of had to be, the nanny cam footage I could talk about. There were some timeline things. One of the main things was, horrifically enough, that there was 2 instances that night. So,
Okay.
yeah, and again, I've never seen the video and I don't want to, but right around when they got home from the park, when her phone had supposedly died. Oh, by the way, shocker, her phone was on the whole time. And she was Googling modeling things, trying to get H into some modeling classes. So her phone never died. That was a lie. Yeah. So she was blatantly ignoring my phone calls. When they got home from the park, shortly after the first incident occurred, I don't know details because they didn't want to know. But what I do know is there was a span of 9 minutes where right there in the living room on the camera, Fallon was being horrifically abused.
9 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a small number, but then imagine how long it felt for her, and that's unbelievably awful.
Yeah.
And why would she do it right in front of that's just so strange to me.
It really is. It's like, what could be going through her mind? And so I never asked for details about that because I don't want them. So figuring that out is horrific. So then kind of fast forward to the FaceTime call we had with Fallon. And, people describe it, oh, she was propped up in a bed. Maybe I described it not in the best way. The room was dimly lit. I didn't see any bruises on her. She was very out of it, but she did speak. At the end of that phone call, before Kirstie hung up on me, I said, do you want to talk to Daddy? And she said, yes. And the second she said yes, Kirstie hung up the phone. And then it turned into, oh, my phone died again. Sorry.
Conveniently.
The most heartbreaking part of all of this is that after that, they had tried to have dinner. Fallon wouldn't eat, which made Kirstie very angry. And there's a part of the video where Fallon is brought into her bedroom and Jeff is in there, and we presume another attack occurred because that is when Fallon was becoming irresponsive in and out of it. So from this knowledge, we know that, heartbreakingly enough, if it had stopped at the first incident, the medical examiner believed that Fallon would have survived those injuries. It would have been an uphill battle. She would have had some struggles, but she believes she would have made a full recovery. So whatever happened in the bedroom was the fatal injury. So knowing this now is this woman is deliberately blocked me or ignoring my phone calls while she's just, it wasn't like a one-time snap thing. Like, this was 2 separate attacks. And with this knowledge, and it's funny because Jeffrey's lawyer, I don't know why. I don't know what he thought he was doing for his client. I wonder if he secretly hated Jeffrey so much that he did this knowing it would screw things up. So we were supposed to go to trial in November of 2023. And right around then, Jeff's lawyer at the time took this video to the medical examiner, which is so wrong on so many levels. Like, why are you doing this? I don't have a good enough understanding of the law yet to understand why and how things happen, but I just can't understand why his lawyer would have thought this would be a good idea.
He took the nanny cam video?
Yeah, and showed the medical examiner who did Fallon's autopsy. And when the medical examiner viewed this video, her opinion changed entirely because they have to find cause and manner of death. And she did that. But by showing her this video and her watching the first attack, watching Fallon come on and off the camera afterwards, she was a little disoriented. She was kind of looking off the side. She was acting kind of like a little zombie, but those injuries would not have been fatal. So because of this, and because we now know the fatal injuries occurred in the bedroom, the DA was able to reindict Jeffrey on all of Kirstie's charges. He always originally had the second degree and the cruelty to children and those. But they went ahead and reindicted him on the malice murder, the aggravated child abuse, the aggravated sexual child abuse, all of it.
So he was involved in all of it.
Well, we still don't really know, but here's the thing. We can't say he wasn't. Now we have more reason to believe you were, because you were in that room and whatever happened in there. Now we can't prove. It's not necessarily that we can prove you did something, but you can't prove that you didn't. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that kind of threw a wrench in everything, because his story still to this day is he had no idea. He saw nothing, heard nothing, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. So obviously his lawyer really needed to kind of come up with a new angle. So at the end of the day, when we got to jury selection, it was going to be on a Monday in March. And we're fully ready to go to trial. These people are saying they're innocent, so we're going to trial. And I get a call on Sunday at like 7:00 in the afternoon. And I'm told that I need to be in court on Monday because they're both going to plead guilty. Wow. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, where'd that come from?
And I had such mixed feelings, right? Because I've been mentally preparing for a trial for over 3 years. And they waited until the night before jury selection to decide to plead guilty. So we get into the courtroom on Monday. She pleads guilty. I believe now she knew all along this is what she was going to do. It was like a last power move. Like, we're all wondering for so long, and everyone's asking me, how is she going to defend? What is she going to defend? I don't know. I'm thinking that too for years. I'm like, how is she going to say she's not guilty? You're on video.
What strategy do you have?
Exactly. So it turns out there was no strategy. I feel like that was her last bit of power she had over anybody. And she played it until the last second. And so strangely enough, she was like, yeah, I'll play guilty, whatever, pretty nonchalant. Jeff really, he said he would, but the next day in court, he kind of backtracked. Like, he was really not wanting to plead guilty. And I just couldn't understand that. Like, why not? Because if he pleads guilty that day, they were going to let him plead to second-degree murder and give him 15 years, non-parolable to the door. And I'm like, what is his hang up? If he doesn't plead guilty to these charges today, he's going to go to trial on all of Kirstie's charges. Why? What is wrong with you? And it turns out, I didn't realize, in the state of Georgia, second-degree murder isn't like meditated, premeditated. Second-degree murder is defined in the state of Georgia as an act of abuse that leads to the death of a child. So essentially, second-degree murder means you killed a kid. And I didn't realize that. So he didn't want to plead guilty, because if he pleads guilty to second-degree murder, he's admitting that he killed a kid. And he's terrified because he's going to go to prison, and he knows he's not going to have a very good time in there. Right. Because that's his charge, second-degree murder. You killed a kid. That's why you're in here. So that's why it was a hang up for him. So I almost think that he was just kind of wanting to take it to trial and just hoping that somehow he got found innocent, which wouldn't have happened. So it took a few hours. Everyone, I feel like on his camp, they're like, look, you will be out one day. If you don't plead, like, and you go to trial on all these charges, like, you're stupid.
Right.
So eventually he did plea, and it was really satisfying for me to get up and make my victim impact statement, and also to hear them both say guilty, whether they wanted to or not, whether they believed it or not. They both had to sit there and say that they were guilty. And there was something really satisfying about that to me. And
yeah, that had to be cathartic, just hearing them admit it.
Yeah, it was. And again, circling back to things they learned while investigating Fallon's case is that Jeff should have been arrested right away. Because again, he was out for a month. Like I said, he overdosed. I think it was like 6 times before he finally got arrested on the charges pertaining to Fallon. And one thing I've been wanting to say for so long, but I couldn't, was that the last time they found him overdosed, he had a friend, and I won't say her name, but I wish she could have been used as a witness, but she was a drug user. And then there were some other scenarios going on where some people she was affiliated with were under investigation for certain crimes. So she would never have been a credible witness, but she still did speak with Lauren. And one day she asked Jeff, why do you keep doing this to yourself? And he said, because I keep hearing the baby crying. And the last time he overdosed, before he got locked up, he's not answering his phone. So his family's worried. This girl's worried. They all know this is not good. Like, he's probably overdosed again, right? So this girl drives over to the apartment, which was the same apartment that Fallon had been murdered in.
They still lived there.
Jeff still lived there. He stayed there up until he was arrested, even though they were facing eviction.
Yeah.
So anyway, she goes over there, doors unlocked, lets herself in, and she found Jeff and another man in the bed, naked, overdosed.
Oh, wow.
And this man was one of Jeff's prison buddies. So hearing that, I was just like, oh my gosh, this man has some secrets. I just reveled in it a little bit because I was finding out so many things after the fact, like that Jeff was cheating on Kirstie left, right, and center, and then finding out not only with women, with men. I don't care if anyone's gay or bisexual or anything like that, but it was just kind of funny to me that it was one of his prison buddies.
Yeah.
Because as far as I know, Jeff, and maybe he is bisexual, but I mean, most of the cheating he did on Kirstie was with females. So I just thought of the look on her face if she had known that, because she waited for him to get out of prison, and then they got pregnant with their son. So she was putting money on his books and stuff. Wow. I've heard from some employees that worked there at the time that he called her the big girl. He just said horrible things about her and said that the only reason he's with her is because she sends him money and just had nothing great to say about her ever. I found it so funny because Kirstie knew she was being cheated on when he was out, but I'm like, even when he was in prison, he was cheating on you, girl. And I kind of reveled in that. I'm like, I
think that's fair.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I was just like, this is great. And of course, I didn't know any of this at the time. She, like I mentioned when we talked first, she made little, I wish Jeff would propose comments, but there was so much going on in that relationship that I had no idea about. I mean, cheating constantly. He had no respect for their relationship. he was using hard drugs. She gave me some excuse once he got fired from a job when Cameron got him on that he was just smoking by like legal weed basically, but it's not. And I remember thinking like they outlawed that a long time ago, but okay. So I thought she was talking about maybe like Delta 8 or something like that. And he wrecked a car at work and he got fired. Well, come to find out he was using heroin and cocaine and all kinds of drugs. And that made me so angry because she knew this. And she conveniently didn't tell me that because she knew I don't care if he's at work all day. I would not have ever had Fallon over there with an active user. Because I mean, there's things you can get into, especially if you're an IV user, which he was. Fallon could have pricked herself with a needle. And if I had known the house was that unstable, Fallon would not have been staying over there. So there were a lot of things Kirstie intentionally misled me about because she knew I was a good mom.
Time for a quick sponsor break.
For her to disparage me in the way she did, I remember when I watched those videos for trial prep, and I already had known some things she was saying on jail phone calls. I don't know if I told you last time, but she was saying to her friends who would listen and to a family counselor that she was in the process of adopting Fallon because her home life was just so abusive. And I'm like, what? Girl, like, you watched her 3 days a week and I paid
That's
you.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. And again, in her interview, like, well, she only pays me 125, like kind of doing her a favor. And I'm like, Fallon's full-time daycare charged me 175 for 5 days. Like, actually, at the end of the day, who's doing who the favor, you know? And she would tell her neighbors and her friends, she would just talk crap about me constantly and talk about what a bad mom I was and how she was watching Fallon for free and that I was just this piece of shit that married a child molester and all these things she was saying behind my back. And here I am thinking how grateful I was for her and how much she loved Fallon. And Fallon would come home with toys and arts and crafts and so many toys to the point I had to tell Kirstie, please stop sending her home with toys. Fallon has enough toys. And so she used some of that. I don't know if all of that was made public, but some things she said in interviews is like, I give Fallon everything, toys, clothes. I told her to stop. She was giving me so many hand-me-downs and so many toys. I'm like, literally, I don't need anything. Please stop. You were just trying to clean out your house of clothes. And here you are acting like a saint. Oh, watching that interview, I feel like each time I find something that irks me a little bit more.
I can imagine. As I was watching it, I was shouting at the screen.
Yes.
It's so
infuriating. And so those were a lot of things I couldn't say that could have hurt the case. But just to find out that the abuse, because I always had thought that she snapped and did what she did. But to find out that it was a prolonged thing happening through the night, there was 2 separate attacks. On the autopsy, there was a carrot found in Fallon's esophagus, and Kirstie's daughter, kind of opened up in some therapy. And I don't want to divulge too much, but she had said something along the lines of, Mommy got angry because Fallon wouldn't eat. So we can assume that that carrot was placed there by somebody. Just kind of some more of the nitty gritty, just horrific things. And again, there's a lot of those things that are just for my daughter's dignity, but it's horrible enough as it is. But just some of these details, like that she had a carrot shoved down her esophagus, and knowing that there was 2 separate attacks and the Google searches she made. And I can't get a hold of her. So I'm calling Jeff and he's not answering. And then they finally get a phone and they were both totally fine. And this is so creepy and chilling to me is when I called, I had been calling over and over because I'm at this point annoyed. I'm like, you hung up on me while we were FaceTiming Fallon. I've been asking to FaceTime her all day. She seemed kind of groggy and then your phone dies again. And I'm a little unnerved at this point and annoyed. But again, I trusted her. And I'm like, I know this is first night jitters. But again, Kirstie and I always kind of had an open line of communication. Like this phone dying stuff didn't happen. And Cameron gets all the credit for, should we go get her? And I said no. Cameron ended up being a terrible husband and we've since divorced. But I will say she threw him under the bus a lot. She called him a sex offender. If you just put his name in the registry, he's not. She made a lot of claims about him that aren't true. Did he end up being a good husband and father to Asher? No. I don't have many nice things to say about him, but out of respect for our son, I will not go into huge detail about that. But I will say, as much as he is able to love, he did love Fallon and he was good to her. And regardless of how bitter our divorce was, I will always consider him her father.
Yeah.
So, to hear her disparage him like that was really frustrating, and disparaging him in that way. And then saying that I just knowingly married this sex offender and I just left my daughter alone with him. That's the most infuriating part. And the scary thing for me about that video coming out is I was scared that people were going to believe that. So I had a lot of anxiety when the first video came out, when the footage of their interrogations was made public. But I knew what was in that. And again, I was terrified of that coming out because I know how people are and how horrible people are. And I was like, oh my gosh, someone's going to believe that. And I was terrified, but I've been happy to see that seems like the majority of people know she's full of crap. And if they were that concerned, they can look up a name on any type of registry and quickly realize that he's not on one. But yeah, that was so infuriating to me, just to insinuate that I married a child molester and just left him alone with my daughter.
She would have gone to any lengths to make you look worse and herself look better.
Exactly.
And as a friend, that's not what you do.
Exactly. And it's contrast between both of our footage, because even the next day when I'm being interviewed and the detectives are asking me what happened, I didn't disparage Kirstie. I was devastated. I'm sobbing. I'm just in there crying, and I'm asking the investigator, what happened to my daughter? And they're asking me questions about Kirstie and Jeff. And I didn't say anything disparaging about her, even though my daughter had just died in her care. I was so in shock and in a weird headspace. And honestly, I could not believe that she was capable of that. Honestly, I was thinking, she was having some beef with the neighbors across the street. And my head was going crazy places, like maybe her neighbors ran it. Like, I wasn't thinking clearly. My best friend, Megan, she said she knew. She knew because she never liked her. She always rubbed her the wrong way. And she just didn't like this girl, but she knew she was my friend. So, but she said at the time, she didn't have the heart to say anything. So she was just like, I don't know. But she said the second that it happened, she knew exactly that girl did it. And so anyway, my police interviews compared to hers are so different. They're asking me, how often does she stay there? What's her normal day look like? Asking me about Kirstie. And I'm like, well, we've been friends for 5 years. And nothing really disparaging about her. The only maybe disparaging thing I said about Jeff was just that he seemed like someone who was kind of battling with some demons when, when
Yeah,
I
and
said,
that's
well,
not even a bad thing.
exactly. And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, he's an addict. And she said he was smoking spice and he just got fired from his job. And I said, so Cameron got him a job at where he works. And I just said, I didn't mean like literal demons. What I
Right.
meant. Yeah, because they jumped on that. What do you mean by that? Looking back on it, it really shows you, like, I think a difference in our character, how fast she wanted to throw me under the bus for my daughter's murder that I couldn't have physically taken part in because I wasn't with her, how long she had been saying horrible things about me. And it just kind of all started to make sense. And you know how we had been trick or treating together that year? We were in one of her friends' neighborhoods. And I've since talked to this girl and we're okay. And she was one of those in the beginning that was like, it was like my people and her people on Facebook were just fighting because her
Okay.
people were saying Kirstie would never, and my people were saying she did. And this girl happened to be one of Kirstie's defenders. But anyways, when we went trick or treating, we went in her neighborhood. And I remember she wouldn't look at me. Like I didn't know this girl personally. This was my first time meeting her in person, but I'd known of her. We kind of had run in the same circles before, and Kirstie invited me. So I figured, yeah, we'll go. But this girl was just being I just remember thinking she was really, really snobby. I was like, what is her problem? And now I look back in hindsight and I'm like, oh my God, Kirstie was probably telling this girl horrible things about me. So this girl probably didn't like me for whatever reason. But I remember at the time just being like, what is her problem? It kind of made me experience, let's just say, we hit a few houses and we didn't stay super long just because I just didn't feel welcome. It was her neighborhood. Kirstie invited me and I just assumed it was fine, but I was so uncomfortable that we definitely kind of cut it a little short and left early. And I just look back in hindsight and knowing what I know now, how awful Kirstie was behind my back. I'm past the part where I'm hurt, but it's still just like, I looked up to this girl like she was a big sister. I have two sisters and I'm the oldest. So I don't have a big sister figure. And she was that for me. And she kind of was a big part of pulling me out of a dark place in my life. And so I looked to her as a mentor and a big sister. And I really admired her and looked up to her because she had been in a similar situation to me and she had gotten her life together. And she was living proof to me that it was possible. And that's what people don't understand about our relationship. Because for me, it was deeper than that. Like she was a role model to me. And now I know none of that was out of the kindness of her heart. She just had some weird savior complex. You can see it in the interrogation footage. Like she's a saint. She's Mother Teresa. I do everything for Fallon and she goes in the interview saying, well, I watch her 3 days a week. And by the end of the interview, it turns into, I watch her every day. She basically lives here and I'm the only one that bathes her. And
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like she turned it around so quick and
she sure did.
Yeah, like she got caught in so many lies and she couldn't keep them coming fast enough.
She seemed very good at spinning the stories. So no wonder she was able to hold things off for a while. And it is unnerving to watch someone with that ability. It makes your skin crawl a little bit.
It does. And I will never forget, like, I'd watched that footage for trial prep. So I'm glad I was able to see it like before it was public.
Yeah.
But I will never forget when the lead detective walked in and let her know that Fallon had passed. She was on the phone with her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And all she said was, wow. And then she got back on her phone and said, did you hear that? She said, okay, well, they're confiscating my phone. She went from all those crocodile tears is she going to be okay? And I love her. And they told her Fallon had died. And she just said, wow.
Yeah.
And was more worried about her phone being taken away and her psychologist appointment in the morning. And let me read over these papers really quick, as if she had a choice. Like, no, ma'am, we have a warrant and we're taking your phone.
Yeah,
And she's
exactly.
like, you can't do that. Just how belligerent she got so quickly.
Well, she knew what they'd find, I think.
Yeah, she knew. And I'm like, I just, it just still sends shivers down my spine. I'm like, I saw this girl 3 days a week. And, sometimes I'd get off work and I'd stick over there for a couple hours and we'd talk. And I really thought I knew her. And I said that when I first saw those interrogation videos. I told Lauren McCauley, I said, that person in those videos, I don't know that person. Like, it was so bone chilling to me. It was almost as if she was like possessed, but I think that was the true her all along. Yeah. And she
just wore a mask for you.
She did. And she did it so well. And I mean, again, people were defending her left, right, and center, which was kind of my main reason I started my page for Fallon. And I did that Dr. Phil interview, which in hindsight, I have different opinions. I used to be a fan of Dr. Phil, and I have quite different opinions on the man now.
Yeah.
If I could go back, I had like 2020, I think, was reaching out, and I probably would have gone more that route. But at the time, I was a fan, and I thought that was the biggest platform to tell Fallon's story, because locally, at least, there was a lot of back and forth between people. Now, when those Google searches came out, a lot of people jumped off the Kirstie bandwagon, but there was still people who were getting calls from her from jail, who were believing what she was saying. And I thought, like, you know what? I'm going to tell her story on the biggest platform I can. And keep in mind, these producers had been hounding me for over a month, and I kept saying no, but they were hounding me enough. And I just one day was like, screw it. They're going to rent us a car. And it was COVID times, and California had weird like quarantine policies. So we couldn't fly in. So we had to drive. And I was like, okay, well, it gives us an excuse to go on a road trip. And I've never been to California. And
that must have been a long drive.
It was. And my sisters were with me and Cameron. And let's just say it was a hellish experience, mostly because of Cameron.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
We made it. Now, to be fair to him, he had a few teeth pulled and he was in some pain, but his mask was starting to slip at that time too. And
yeah,
I thought it would be maybe get my mind off things, kind of fun experience. And it turned out to be everything but that. And if I could go back, I just wouldn't have brought him. And he would have stayed home and me and my sisters would have gone. But, I just thought, I'm just going to tell her story one good time, and I'm going to tell it to the largest audience I can. People need to know the truth. And I had my page for Fallon, but it kind of spun into something bigger. So I don't regret doing that interview. I think Dr. Phil has a tendency to get people on there and purposely make them look like fools. But the producer did right by us. They didn't edit us out of context. They were very gracious. I don't have really a whole lot of negative things to say about the producers or anything. And overall, it was a good experience. I just now over the years have had to change my opinion on Dr. Phil, because I kind of think I think he just profits off people's trauma. And
he exploits people for sure.
Exactly. But for what I needed at the time was just to get Fallon's story out to the largest audience that I could, because I felt like there was just too much misinformation. And I wanted the whole world to know what that evil woman had done to my daughter. So I was on a warpath.
Yeah.
And Kirstie knew about that. She was making comments to people on the phone. It's so funny because I got the lowdown on all of her jail calls, but she was saying that what I was doing was just excessive. Like I was doing the most and saying things like, you think she would just let it go by now? Like,
Yeah, you're doing the
yeah,
most. I mean,
I'm
really.
doing the most and I was being excessive and
Oh, you drama
ruining
queen.
her life. Yeah. Like she took it so personally. Like I was just going out of my way to ruin her life. And I was like, you murdered my daughter,
Yeah,
my only
there's nothing
child.
worse you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. She is truly very delusional at best and just so self-absorbed and narcissistic. And she thinks she's the smartest one in the room. And
Oh,
uh,
yes.
she's a victim. And how she was telling the cops, like, you're not going to jam me up. You're not going to ruin my life over this. Like, ruin your life? You
Yeah, she had nothing to
ruined,
do with it.
yeah, like, and you ruined my life.
Right.
What do you mean? And yes, I've since had another son and my life will go on, but you permanently traumatized me. I don't trust anyone. I don't
No.
have a big circle of friends and I honestly don't want any. And I
Well,
know that's
between
something
that and Cameron, it has to be like you can't trust
I
yourself
can't
anymore.
trust
I
it.
get that.
Yeah, no, literally, because I'm like, wow, I thought I was a good judge of character. And obviously, yeah, it is like that. Again, I have my friend Megan, and we've been friends since we were 12. And she's the type that if I don't answer the phone, especially after Ray is passing, and she'll just stop by, open the door, hey girl. And it's like, she just
Oh,
knows when I need, you know what I mean? And I always joke with her, like, with friends like you, like, who needs more friends, you know?
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and I know that's something like one day I should probably face, and it would probably be good to have friends. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just kind of in this place where I have my fiance and my son, and I have her, and me and my sisters are really close, and my family's pretty tight knit. And, you know, I have a bunch of friends like in the workplace that I see and talk to every day. But like, as for people that I hang out with on a regular basis, that doesn't exist. And I have friends that I was friends with before all this happened who have reached out and offered to hang out. And I know they're nice people and I want to. I do, but it's just like I, I I'm really struggling with that. Like she has left lifelong trauma on me, and just for her to say her life was being ruined, I'm like, my daughter is gone and that will never change. You murdered an innocent 2-year-old.
Right.
Like
She took a life, and that's not something you can take back.
no. And an innocent child, a sweet child, a child who claimed to love, a child who trusted you. And to my face, it was nothing but love and how proud she was of me and how what a good mom I am. And I remember she would send me pictures of Fallon throughout the day and be like, Fallon says she's so proud of you for working so hard to support the family. And how can you be so fake to somebody and then turn around? I don't understand that level of manipulation and for what?
It had to be, like you said, the savior complex and a murder type thing where she was
Yeah.
the one who was doing everything, and she's just wonderful.
Yeah. And part of me thinks like after I got married, she wanted that with Jeff and he was never going to give that to her. And I think that like in her sick little brain, she was fine with me when I was beneath her, right? No one's beneath anyone, but when I was struggling or,
Yeah.
you know, homeless or whatever, when I needed her, she was fine with that. But when she
Right.
started to see me get it together and have a job, and all of a sudden I got an apartment and I'm married and I didn't need her anymore. And not only that, but like I was maybe in her head rising above her. She could not handle that. She
Right.
needed me to need her. She needed me to be below her. Envy, they call it the green monster of envy or whatever, is poisonous. And I was working 40 plus hours a week, exhausted, and we're barely scraping by in our 1-bedroom apartment. But what I had that she didn't was happiness. And the only way she could keep her man around was, he wrecked the car, she bought him a new car, or sending him money while he's in prison. And she basically has to keep him around by force. And he's out cheating on her left, right, and center. And I think that a lot of her anger was towards him.
Yeah, because she can't blame herself. It couldn't be her fault for choosing the wrong one or anything like that. It's all someone else's fault.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I just remember those comments now. I wish Jeff would propose, but she definitely was just so happy for me, I just, oh my God, I love you guys. You're so sweet. I'm so excited. If you guys want to go on like a honeymoon or a date, like let me know. I'll watch Fallon and blah, 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 blah. And just again, behind my back, she hated me deep down in her soul.
That's what happened?
Yeah, I think so. I think over time, it was a buildup of that. And then I got married in October. I don't know why that day. And that's what always gets me, because it was easier for me to think like she snapped. But knowing what I know now is that this was very premeditated. I mean, she randomly asked me to spend the night with Fallon during the day, which she never did. Mm-hmm. First sleepover. She had asked me before, or she would say, hey, she should spend the night sometime. Like, we should plan that. And I'd always be like, yeah. But sometimes I'd go to pick her up and her daughter would ask if she could stay over. And I'd be like, no, not tonight. One, I'm already here. I'm going to pick her up. And two, like, I haven't seen her all day. I want her home. We had discussed the possibility of, the girls having a sleepover. And I wasn't opposed to the idea. I just wasn't quite ready for that yet. And not because I didn't trust her. I just wasn't quite there.
She was too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But for whatever reason, that random day when she texted and asked, I was like, you know what? Yeah, it's fine. And it was just because I was going to be off a little later and, we're going to eat dinner, have a bath. She's going to go to bed, and then I'm going to get her up at 6:00 in the morning. So for me, it's like, well, wow, how great is it that I have this person that wants to keep her, wants to go above and beyond, and wants to have her overnight. And then that way Fallon doesn't have to get up at 6:00 in the morning.
And she gets to have fun.
Yeah, she gets to have fun with her friends. And at this point, Kirstie's been watching her for, about 4 or 5 months, and I'd never had any issues. Anytime there was like a bump or bruise, she would take a picture. She would tell me, or I'd pick her up and she'd be like, oh, she scratched her leg. And she never had any bruises that were suspect, abnormal for a child to have. Scraped knees here and there, or like a bump on the head. The worst thing she ever came home with was that scratch on her face. That one still gets me to this day because of the changing of her story. But I just remember Fallon holding her little cheek and saying, ow, puppy. And I'm like, okay, the dog.
I'll pause here for another word from my sponsors.
With all that being said and concluded, it's kind of so clear what her motives were, but yet not. I'll never have the answers that I want.
Yeah, I mean, she took out her jealousy for you on the baby, which obviously it's unacceptable, but I can't imagine that any normal person would think that's how you make these feelings for yourself go away.
Mm-hmm. It's barbaric.
Yeah.
Is the best way to put it. And again, it was easier for me to process it thinking that she snapped. It's been hard to kind of deconstruct that this was not I snapped and then oh no, it was 2 attacks and it was almost seemingly premeditated. I mean, were making these Google searches. And I kind of had the timeline. The timelines are different. And I feel like I never got a clear answer. I always thought they were at 10 a.m., which I think some of them were. But the weirdest thing to me is that a few of those searches were made after the first attack. So she attacked Fallon for 9 minutes straight and then got on her phone and Googled things like, I beat other people's children and I enjoy it. Like, all those weird Google searches. And I'm like, what happened?
It's so weird.
It's incomprehensible. And I've kind of just had to come to a point in my life where I've had to accept that there are things that I will never understand, and that's okay. You can't understand evil. And I realized I was going to drive myself insane at trying to answer the question, why? Because there's no way to answer that question. You can't reason with a scenario like this. It is what it is. It is evil. People do things all the time that are just incomprehensible to a healthy mind. Someone who is not evil.
Right, exactly. Most people.
And so I've just kind of had to accept that she did what she did, and I am never going to know why. And I don't even think Kirstie could give me that answer. I don't think there's anything that she could ever say to me that would bring me any peace or be of any value. I think she's just deep down really evil, and I'm glad she is where she is. She got sentenced. We have life without parole, and that is where she deserves to be. She will never hurt another child, and I truly believe that Fallon saved her 2 children's lives because
she had a baby boy, and then she had her 4-year-old right at the time.
Mm-hmm. And come to find out, she was abusing them. And again, out of respect for them, I won't divulge too much, but her daughter, thankfully, is in some adequate counseling, and some things have come out. And they had that nanny cam footage, and they were able to go back weeks and months and however long it's stored. And her son would sit, those little walkers. And they say that you shouldn't leave a kid in them for longer than like 45 minutes at a time because it will do something to their hips, or I don't know exactly, but he would be in that thing for hours on end. One day.
Just because it was easier.
Mm-hmm. And then she's in there talking about how I just feed her junk food because it's just the easy way out. So one day in particular, they said that he was in that thing for about 8 hours.
Oh my God.
Without being changed, without being picked up, without anything. I mean, super neglectful. And he also wore a helmet, which again, sometimes that happens. It's not in and of itself a sign of neglect. But the most common cause of that is neglect, but that does not mean that every parent who has a child that needs a helmet out their skull form does not mean that they're neglecting their child. So, but when paired with, she's sticking him in a walker for up to 8 hours at a time without changing his diaper, things like that. With all of that, hindsight is 2020, and she was good. She was really manipulative. And at the end of the day, I was so shocked. But as the years have gone by and I've learned of what was going on and how she's acted in jail and the things she was saying behind my back, I see straight through her now. I wish that had been the case sooner. But again, she's one of those people that was really, really good at what she did. She was a very great actor. And again, there was a news clip where a woman was on the news saying that she all about her children her whole life. She would never hurt a child. I mean, someone believed that so much that they were willing to go on the news and say that after she had been arrested. It helps me be a little bit more forgiving to myself, knowing that I wasn't the only one that was fooled by her.
Good.
Watching that footage, I think, tells it all, especially because we all know what we know now. I mean, her demeanor is so calm, and she's joking around with them, and she's just so unfazed by what happened. And she blames it on her dog. Then it's a stranger at the park, and then it's off the slide. And then, well, maybe she fell and hit her head on concrete. And she didn't do it, but almost there for a second, I feel like she was almost going to insinuate that maybe her 3 going on 4-year-old daughter done something, because, they play in there for hours. But she admits, well, I'm not proud of it, but sometimes I shut my door. She could have fallen, and there's concrete under the floor. And then she made the funniest comment when they show a picture of a bruise or something, and she's like, yeah, that's blood. And it's something, because they were clearly looking at the photograph she was so willing to show during the day I'm at the park, because look how great I am. We went to the park. And then they show them a picture of Fallon, presumably while she was in the hospital. And Kirstie said something so dumb. She said, yeah, well, if I saw a bruise, like, I wouldn't let a bruise continue to be a bruise. Like,
I don't know what you do with it.
Exactly. I wouldn't let a bruise continue to be a bruise. And I just I think that's in there. I think it's in at least the Law and Crime Network video. But I remember that was something in her interrogation footage. And one thing they missed on Jeff that I wish he had included is that Jeff claimed that he got home around 4:30 and got in the shower. No one was home. They got home when he was in the shower, and he said he got out of the shower around 6:30.
Oh my God.
So this man,
a 2-hour shower.
Yeah, in an apartment complex in the afternoon when everyone's getting home. Like, everybody knows that shower gets cold in about 20 minutes. He actually said that he was in the shower for 2 hours. Oh my gosh, these people are. And I'm glad that I can find parts of it that I can laugh at now that I'm like, they think, especially with Kirstie, she thinks she's the smartest person in the room. That's why her arrest footage is just so satisfying, because she realized in that moment that she wasn't indeed the smartest person in the room.
She hadn't tricked everyone.
Mm-hmm. And, she went in the next day and she said, I was talking to my mom, and you guys need to talk to your 911 people, because you don't give a baby CPR like that. She was telling me to push down, and basically saying that these trained 911 dispatchers gave her wrong information on how to do CPR, which what she was referring to is correct for children 1 and under, like infants.
Mm-hmm.
But
do you think she was trying to maybe blame their bad instructions for what happened?
Yes. She said, I was thinking she could have been all bruised up like that because they were telling me to push, and basically saying that she was given instructions to do rather rough CPR. So that perhaps could be why that she had all that internal bleeding, because of the CPR. So it wasn't,
she would have blamed it on anyone.
Anybody, yes. She was really reaching at straws, and the investigators kind of let her think that they believed her. And then when they came in and told her to turn around so he could put the cuffs on, and she's like, wait, why? And then she says, no, you can't do this. And he was like, I am doing this. So I know it's kind of morbid that I can laugh at it, but like, it's kind of a little bit cathartic that I can just laugh at how, like how just preposterous she is. And the resounding feedback has been that everybody can see through her. And that's been really relieving because, again, knowing that footage was out, I thought the worst. So I was like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to believe her and think that I married a child molester and all these things. And I have not even seen personally any comments of, I mean, I got that one message from that lady saying that I should be in jail for murder too and all that. Yeah. But I was able to just ignore that. And I generally don't read comments on videos, but I kind of scroll a little. And when I see that the majority rules in favor of she's just a liar, and I don't see anyone disparaging me for marrying a child molester, which again, he wasn't. I found that to be a relief, and I just kind of felt no more reason to look at comment sections.
Right. Yeah,
so
you
that
vindicated.
Was yes, exactly. And I don't even know why that was such a worry, because like it's so obvious that she's lying, and I mean she's the one sitting in prison, not me, but it's just scary. I was just so like worried that people were really going to believe that. And even looking back on that mindset, I don't know why I really even worried about that. But it's just one of those things when you've been on the internet for an amount of time, you know how awful people can be. And I was just so scared that I was going to receive so much negative backlash. And I'm already was having some issues with my pregnancy. And it was just a really scary, hard time for me. And thankfully, at least I didn't have to deal with a bunch of horrible comments on the internet. So if they're there, I'm not reading them. So
good.
Yeah, people can go off and say what they want.
They will anyway, so you might as well stay out of it.
Yeah. Thanks to Fallon, one day, like we talked about earlier, I feel led to something in her name and help families. And again, right now, I'm not healed enough, and it may be years before it happens, but I just know that one day, like, I will be helping people in her name. And I know that she's always with me. And there's some days that the grief feels really new and fresh. Her birthday just passed, so those are generally pretty hard days for me. The month of September in general, but once her birthday comes and goes, I kind of get back to normal. And I can imagine probably for the rest of my life, I'm gonna go through cycles of grief and depression. And after Rhea just recently passed, I kind of joke about my PTSD, like it flares up, but it's very true.
Yeah.
So that was really hard for me because I do feel like.
Do you want to talk about Rhea at all? Because I know some people will know, but it's got to be hard to talk about and think about. But if you want to talk about her, that's totally fine.
No, we can. There's that cycle of grief, and I've kind of reached acceptance. And I will say, experiencing now infant loss and child loss, experiencing infant loss is horrific, but I will say that there is a difference, not in the amount of love or grief, but there's a difference in losing an infant and then having your 2-year-old daughter be murdered, like the shock factor. And I've raised this girl for 2 years, and it's different. I'm not going to say one less painful than the other, but you understand what I'm saying. So I found out I was pregnant this year on Easter, and it was definitely unplanned, but nevertheless, we were ecstatic. And then when I found out she was a girl, I was just over the moon. I wouldn't have cared either way, but I'd always hoped that I would be blessed with another daughter. And, I've had 2 C-sections, so it's always been kind of like my next one will be my last. So thankfully things went the way they went, at least. So going through the pregnancy was generally healthy. It was a little strange because both of my pregnancies with Fallon and with Asher, I was very sick, like vomiting, constantly miserable. But with Rhea, I wasn't. I had like some pretty major food aversions and sensitivities to smell that I didn't really have in the other two. I just had not even morning sickness, just like all day sickness with them. So I just thought, well, maybe she's being nice to mommy. But on August 13th, I went to a specialist appointment. I was seeing a specialist because with Asher, I had gestational diabetes. And then at Rhea's, like a 10-week ultrasound, she had something. All babies, when they're in utero, have this kind of sac that goes from the back of their neck to like the back of their spine, and it's called their nuchal fold. And it's kind of complicated sciencey stuff, but essentially there's a normal width it should be, and if it's larger than that, then the chance for Down syndrome and other things, other chromosomal issues, it's higher. And the normal range was like 2.5 to 3 millimeters, and hers was measuring at like 5. So it was a concern.
Yeah.
But we did the genetics testing and testing for like spina bifida and stuff, and it was all negative. So I was really grateful because that was really scary, for a while. But, Down syndrome and things, like obviously something we can deal with. But what's the severity? What's her quality? It's just, it's nerve wracking. And Down syndrome would be the least of our worries. I mean, there could have been some serious chromosomal abnormalities. It was a scary time. But when all those tests came back negative, we were really relieved. And I was about almost 6 months pregnant, and she was growing perfectly. Anatomy scans were normal. She was right where she needed to be. I'm feeling pretty good considering my other 2 pregnancies. I had horrible mornings and all day sickness for 2 trimesters. So everything was going well, except I was feeling some pressure. And so when I went for this just routine anatomy, we were finishing up her anatomy scan. When they're in there, sometimes they don't want to cooperate. So they might need a couple pictures of a couple other limbs they weren't able to get. And so they finished up that. Baby looks great. And so I just mentioned the pelvic pressure I had, which prompted an ultrasound that is not abdominal. And they see my cervix, and it was called a complex shortened cervix. So essentially what was happening is my cervix was just kind of opening and closing randomly like it will. So I would be close, and then I would be 1 to 2 centimeters dilated, and then closed. And it's rare, but it's not so rare that they're not sure what they're dealing with. So at that day, August 13th, the doctor insisted that I be hospitalized, just put a wrench in everything. I'm like, I'm working. We're trying to save up money for the baby. I'm like, well, how long? And he's like, oh, I don't really know. We'll recheck on Monday and we'll see where your cervix is at. And he's like, you're 24 weeks. If you were 19, I would cerclage you and send you home. If you were 30, I'd send you home with progesterone and we'd see what happened. But you're at this very critical time where your baby, yes, is viable, but he explained it to me. There's a risk you could go into early labor, da 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 da. And then so I went back that afternoon and checked myself in, and they did everything they could to keep me pregnant. 10 days later, I had her. She was 1 pound, 7 ounces, and she came out wiggling. And I remember I thought I heard a baby crying, and I was like, I must be delusional. But no, she was trying to cry and breathe on her own, and she was feisty. And they told me my water had ruptured a few days prior, and they told me that there was a slight odor to it. So they thought that maybe my amniotic fluid was infected, which I can't even pronounce the word for that. But if you just Google infected amniotic fluid and just read about it, there's not a whole lot of good things, especially when the infant is concerned. I didn't really know all of this while it was happening. So she went up to the NICU and yeah, I was able to deliver her vaginally. So they had me up and walking within a couple hours, and they're all like, "Oh my gosh, you're doing great." And I'm like, "I've been cut open twice. Like, this is nothing, you know?" So little Rhea was born. And the craziest thing about being pregnant with her is that her due date was December 9th of 2024. And December 9th was the day that Fallon was attacked. And I just knew, like, that this can't be a coincidence.
Now for one last sponsor break.
Anyway, so she really thrived the first 4 days of her life. And I discharged on the 26th, and she was doing well. She would kind of go back and forth from room air to they needed to put her up in the 30s. The room air is like 21% oxygen, and they did end up needing to put her on an oscillator instead of a ventilator, which breathes for them at a rapid rate. But a lot of doctors like it. They feel it's more gentle on the lungs, and the babies can rest, and the machine is doing all of the work for them. And she was stubborn. I could still see her making breasts on her own over that. So she was a fighter, you know, and I discharged, and that night she just took a turn for the worst, and her blood gas became very acidic. I talked to the nurse around 10 o'clock, and they were very concerned about that. But at that point, her vitals were normal. So they had given me a few reasons why it could be happening. So nevertheless, I was worried sick, but also so exhausted that I shut my eyes. And when I woke up, I saw that they had called me like 45 minutes after we talked, and I just, my heart sank. And so we called back around 4 o'clock, and her vitals had tanked. And the doctor said that I'm really worried that she may not make it. So we called my mom to come stay at my house to be with Asher so we could go up there. And the doctor called 10 minutes later, and he said they were starting CPR, and you know, we're trying to get up there. And 10 minutes later, the doctor calls again. And at this point, I'm hysterical, and Bo just grabbed the phone and answered it. I think we both knew. I knew when he told me he wasn't sure she was going to make it. I just knew. And then when he said they were doing CPR, like, you want to have hope, but I knew that she was going to pass. And that's been really hard. It really shook my faith, because I always thought that because of what happened to Fallon, all of my children would be protected forever. And I know there's cases where parents were more than one child, and I just couldn't even imagine. I'm just like, no, my kids will always be protected. And I was gearing up and mentally preparing for a very anxiety-inducing NICU parent life, but we were ready, you know. For her to just turn so quickly, it was really jarring. And it's hard right now because I should still be pregnant. That's a real struggle. So I'm hoping that once that due date comes and goes, that things will get a little easier.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, what did I do wrong? And all the doctors are like, you didn't do anything with a weird condition. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if my cervix has been opening and closing at will, it's summertime. I've been to the pool. I've been in the lake. No wonder something could have caused some type of infection, especially the leg. And you don't know what you don't know. And the thing about that complex shortened cervix is like many of the symptoms are regular pregnancy symptoms. Pelvic pressure, lower back pain, it's pregnancy symptoms. The only thing that made me feel a little uneasy about it, because I didn't been experiencing that pressure for probably about a month, but I started thinking, I feel like in my other pregnancies, I experienced this little later on, like this is some third trimester stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I, I hadn't said anything about it. And I just, whatever prompted me to mention it, I guess the pressure has been getting worse. So I'm glad that I did, because after I did, things started to happen really quickly in the hospital where I'm starting to see a lot of blood and things are happening. Thankfully, I said something before I started having those types of symptoms, because that would have been really scary to be home and to visit you guys or something like that. So we had a little memorial and we had her cremated, and I don't know what I need yet. I'll know what I see it, but I want some type of time capsule thing, and I want to somehow leave it with Fallon. Like, I feel like maybe if I just dig a teeny tiny little hole and drop it in there, like they'll never know. So I want to leave some of that there. And I've kind of gone through those stages of grief rather quickly. I'm just that acceptance, because they said that if it was in fact infected amniotic fluid, I could have gone septic and died as well. Like, there's a lot of complications that I could have had. Yeah.
You have another little guy to worry about too. And
exactly. So I think my body just knew there was something wrong, whether it was infection or something with her. My body went into labor, and it's been pretty devastating, but it's been a little over a month that I've been out of work for a while. So my aunt's friend did set up a GoFundMe, which basically covered us the whole month of August and then some. So I'm super grateful for that. After Rhea passed, it was just isolating, and I became really angry with God. And I think postpartum depression and hormones were all swirling around, and got really dark for a while, but I got some help, and I've switched around therapists here and there since Fallon died, but I found one that I really like.
Oh, good.
I see her weekly, and I see a trauma therapist weekly. So we're kind of on the mend, still dealing with the depression, which I think I'll always have to a degree, but, you know, there's no reason that we can't try again. You know, if I had to have a C-section, that would have been a different story. So one day we will be able to have another child. And so that's a silver lining. And Rhea is up there with Fallon now. And I have two angels looking down on me. At least Rhea, when she went to heaven, she had her big sister right there, I know, waiting for her.
Yeah.
It's been really hard, but we're hanging in there as best as we can.
I'm glad. And I'm glad you have support with your fiance now. Awesome to hear that he's a good one.
Yeah, he really is. We've been together over a year and a half now, and he's an amazing man. He does so much for me. I don't know what I would do without him. Like, when couples say, like, we don't fight. I'm like, what? Seriously? Like, we really don't. I mean, you know, everybody occasionally gets in an argument here and there, but for the most part, we get along every day. Like, we rarely ever fight or argue. He's been such a support, and my home is now my safe space and my peace, where in my last relationship, it really was turning out to not be that. And after Fallon passed and all the trauma I've been through, my home needs to be my safe space. And it is finally. I have a lot to live for, and I've got a lot to do in Fallon's name. And little over 3 years of just back and forth and to different hearings and court things. And it's finally over. So
Amazing. Yeah, that
yeah,
has to be a huge relief.
it is, because having just this trial looming over me for so long was just such a drain on me. Like, I felt like I couldn't move on. I mean, not that I'll ever move on 100%, but it took so long. And that is one of the fatal flaws of this justice system. Is victims are having to wait years for a trial.
I had one case that was 9.5 years, I want to say. That is so ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. But then I think, how lucky am I? Because I've met a lot of families through an organization called Parents of Murdered Children. And I've been going every year religiously, and I've met several women and families who still have no answer, cold cases. Or even worse, some families know exactly who did it, but for whatever reason, they're not in jail. Or there's so many crazy stories. It just put things into perspective for me, because I'm like so mad that I'm waiting this long for a trial, which justifiably so. But some families don't even get that. I have a really dear friend whose daughter was murdered by her ex-boyfriend, and it was a murder-suicide.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, not only did she not get any type of justice, but at least there's crime funds and things for families like mine. There's a crime fund in Georgia that paid for my counseling for a little over a year and paid for a portion of the funeral. That's a huge help. And it's a nice gesture from the state, but for her, nothing. I mean, it's
really
like, yeah, even though they're a victim, because there's no one that's going to be prosecuted, they didn't get anything. They didn't get a victim advocate it was just kind of like, well, sorry this happened to you. And
that just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I know. I understand that there won't be a prosecution here because the man is dead, but
they were just her loss.
Exactly. So I think that's kind of like another flaw we have. And as horrific as my scenario is, I've heard a few that I'm just like, oh my gosh, you just don't think it can get worse. And then you hear some of those horrific stories. I mean, I know people who have lost multiple children to the same person on the same day, and it's horrible. So again, sometimes I feel guilty when I'm like, oh, I waited 3 years for a trial, which again is justifiable, but in hindsight, like,
yeah, you're like, well, wow. At least it was only 3 years, I guess. And also through COVID, that kind of slowed everything down.
It did. It slowed everything down. And then I'm just fortunate that Fallon did get justice. Jeff, yes, we only got 15 years. Do I believe he deserved a life sentence? Absolutely. But we got 15 years, and I just don't think he's going to make it out alive, whether he overdoses or
or the other inmates find out what he did.
Exactly. And even if he does, he'll be in his 50s. And with Jeff, especially watching that interrogation footage and rewatching it, he feigns innocence. And the worst part, so each side has your prosecutor, and then there's an investigator. And the same way with the defense, you have a lawyer and an investigator. And Jeffrey Meyer's investigator calls me about 3 weeks after he pled guilty. And she tells me that she just wants to put something on my heart and says, Jeffrey didn't know. And I just lost it on her. I'm sobbing. I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you calling me? He pled guilty. What are you trying to do right now? And she's like, he didn't know, and insinuated that the prosecutor's office that lied to me. And I said, she took the SD card to a lawyer with her. Like he didn't answer the phone. And then that's the thing that got me too. When I finally got through to them, they were both just cool as cucumbers. Their voices were calm. Fallon's in bed. She just ate, how much Fallon eats, haha, because Fallon was picky. And he didn't sound shaken up or anything. And at any point, he could have picked up the phone and called me or 911 or, Jeff is like 6'4". I mean, he could have physically stopped her from doing what she did, and he didn't. And this woman is calling me, telling me that he's innocent.
Talk about delusional.
It's crazy, right? And I'm like, this is a professional here, and I'm just sobbing. Like, what are you trying to get out of this lady? This is so inappropriate. Yeah. I was so upset, and I called the district attorney, and she said, "Excuse me, she did what?" She just called you? And I said, yes. And she said, hold on, Kristin. And the whole office was just furious. It was just extremely inappropriate. And I think probably against some type of rule they have to call a victim's mother and say that Jeff is innocent after he just pled guilty a couple weeks ago. Like, what? I will never understand why she did that. And it's kind of another one of those things where I don't like to, I call it a pity party. Like, I don't like to sit and feel sorry for myself. It's not productive. But with that one, I was like, why me? Why does stuff like this happen to me? In between sobs, I had a complete panic attack. I will never understand why she did that. It's pretty apparent that Jeff was there, and at the very least, we can assume that he at least heard what was going on. He's lied and lied and lied for 3 years, and he's still trying to say that he's innocent even after he pled guilty. So, and Jeff's not the brightest guy, so he's not super manipulative. You have to be smart. Yeah, like he's not, you have to be smart to be able to manipulate people. So I don't know what that was about, but she did that. So
great.
She did end up getting fired, and I don't know if that was why. I mean, I know they got her in contempt of court or something. So
I'm so glad that there's some resolution for you, and you can just put that part of it behind you. I'm sure there'll be appeals and stupid things like that, but maybe not, because they did plead guilty. I know
they pled guilty, so no appeals. So amen to that. Yeah. Wonderful. The only thing that's annoying is Jeff will be out. I think it's like 2035. But again, I have a gut feeling he's not going to make it out of there. But, I could be wrong. And I will say for Jeff, people say you need to forgive. And I don't necessarily think that's true, because how do you forgive something like that? But when I watch the interrogation videos back, and I see when he finds out that Fallon died, he started crying. And,
very good that he had a reaction.
Yeah, where Kirstie had none. So whether he was crying for himself or not is left up to interpretation. But something tells me that somewhere in him, deep, 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 deep down, he had a fraction of a conscience. So maybe one day I'll be able to find it in me to forgive him. And he'll never know. I'll never tell him. But it'll just be
for you.
Me. Yeah.
Exactly.
But for Kirstie, I don't think there's ever going to be any room for forgiveness in my heart for her. So, and Kirstie, while she was in jail, she joined the church choir and was talking about God and all that. But I genuinely believe that God knows our hearts, and I don't think there's any room for forgiveness for her. And
Can't imagine.
yeah, I mean, it's not up for me to decide that. And I've made my peace with that. But I think as long as I can find peace, and I think forgiving God was a big step. And if I can find some type of peace, I don't think there's any need for me to forgive her.
Yeah, and that is completely personal, a very personal decision. It's completely up to you. If you ever get there, good for you, if that's what you want. But no one can expect anything from you, I think, as far as that goes. No.
Yeah. I mean, I see comments like that, like, Jesus says to forgive. And I'm like, some things just aren't. And I understand it's for me and not for her. But I just don't see me ever getting to a place where I'm going to be able to do that. And I think that's okay.
I think you can be forgiven for that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If there's anything I can do to help when you go to get into whatever it is you decide to do with Fallon and her memory, just let me know. I'll gladly boost the signal or whatever you need.
Oh, I definitely will. Thank you. Hopefully I have a year and a half to go till I'm a paralegal. And if I can get what I need accomplished done with that, then I will. But if not, my goal is kind of to be a lawyer by the time I'm 40, if that is the direction I need to go in. So I just turned 31. So I think, 9 years to get me along.
Yeah, you got time.
I got time, right? Yeah. That's an attainable goal, possibly.
Thanks so much to Kristin for taking the time to talk with and catch me up on everything. She is one amazing human being. I really hope that Kirstie and Jeff's sentencing gives her some much-needed peace and the ability to start healing. I swear, if I ever meet Kristin in person, I'm going to give her the biggest hug. Also, Kristin specifically wants to give a huge shout-out to Fulton County Deputy District Attorney Lauren McCauley of the Special Victims Division, Crimes Against Children Unit. Ms. McCauley treated Fallon's family with empathy and respect throughout the entire process and advocated more for Kristin than her assigned victims advocate did, and Ms. McCauley deserves to be recognized for being a stellar example of what law enforcement should strive to be. My sources for this episode were the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Georgia Department of Corrections website, the Justice for Fallon Facebook page, and Kristin Fridley. Quick shout-outs to my two newest patrons, Tracy S. from Lemon Springs, North Carolina, and Mimi S. from Bountiful, Utah. Thank you both so much for your support. If you'd like to make a pledge to help keep the show going, you can do so at patreon.com/stlcpod. Oh, and before I sign off, don't forget to check out Magic Mind and use my discount code. I'll include the link in the show notes, but here's the address again, just in case. Visit magicmind.com/buyLaine20 and use discount code BuyLaine20 and see what a difference it makes in your life. That's it for this episode. Join me next time for another child's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. Intro theme music is by Dreamnote Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.